There we go. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our December Blue Monkey Network event. Again, I can only apologise that we're not in Towner in person, but it's great to see so many people joining us online at home. So what we wanted to do for this event was present an out of hours exclusive opportunity to see the exhibitions at Towner, Margaret Mellis and Melis and Gordon. As we can't be there, what we've been trying to do in the last sort of half an hour, 20 minutes, whilst we're waiting for people to join us, is have a look at some installation shots and get a feel for the shows. And I encourage those that haven't seen them yet to go and see them in person. But what we've got tonight is we've got 5 Blue Monkey members have selected 1 or 2 pieces of work from the exhibitions, so they're kind of going to be like talking about particular pieces or themes within the shows that have a resonance and interest to them. So just to let the speakers know, we'll be going in running order. So Patricia Thornton, Judy Marston, Roger Adams, Stephanie Granger and June Nelson when she can join us a bit later on. So Patricia, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Okay.
And if I can just sort of go through the slides as you're talking. And
yes, and can I sort of say stop when?
Yeah, you communicate with me. I'll just be your sort of slide person.
Yeah.
so please, say stop and go or whatever. So I'll hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, no, this is a lovely room within Margaret Mellis's display, and it's exclusively given over to I think it's about 40, of these lovely back of an envelope, opened up envelope, little drawings, really. They're fascinating because I think they're all done in chalk, what is described as chalk or crayon, oil pastel, or is it maybe wax pastel? It's a very, very textured pastel. And they are all flower. The theme for all of them is flowers. So I kind of got the impression that she started doing these just from what was available on her work table, maybe a letter that she could rip open and open up the envelope, and crayons to hand, and maybe a posy of flowers on the table. There's something wonderfully spontaneous about these lovely drawings. And of course, that's the other thing. I looked at the dates. The earliest one was 1975. And I worked out she must have been 61 when she started doing these. And she carried on doing things all through the 80s. Most of them are in the 80s and 90s. So, it was obviously a theme that she just returned to again and again. With I should imagine maybe the envelopes, and sort of once she'd opened them out, all seemed to be very different shapes. And I think she was very fascinated by the shape of the envelope when it's opened out. They're so different, with the little flaps and flanges of and where that would have facilitated making the envelope in the first place. And they make these amazing shapes. But she's very, very conscious of the shape, because when she draws the flowers, they're always like filling the space completely. So she's not just using them for an available scrap of paper. She utilizes every edge. I love this one. Can we have the red one? Yeah, I love this one because she's this is the lining paper to the envelope, and she's obviously inspired by the fact that it was a tissue paper lining to the envelope, and made this ready-made background. But you can still see that the gummed edge and the torn edge. And I think all these things add to the general, your focus is drawn to the flowers and then back to the edges again. Again, lovely, spontaneous, really sort of scratchy marks she's made with her pastels. Yes. Shall we move to another one? Oh yes,
the fuchsia.
This one is again lovely because she's arranged the flowers right into, to push them right up to the torn edge, where the envelope was ripped open.
Are they all on envelopes, darling?
All of them, absolutely all of these ones in this room are all on envelopes. Yeah.
It's all envelopes that she's opened up.
Yeah.
Not to waste them.
I mean, this one, well, it's not just because of the easy availability of paper. She's actually fascinated, I think, with the shapes that are made once it's opened up. Actually, and this one's quite interesting because she's actually gone beyond the envelope onto the beige paper. But the envelope shape itself, I think, is very important to her, and that's where you can see the link with the collage, the wood collage pieces, the found wood relief sculptures, because they have all this irregular contour around the edge. And so I think although it seems, because these are figurative and the other works are abstract,
you have a look at
they're very separate. But I think there's a real link
painting
in the textures, because if you look at some of these, the wax rendering of the flowers is so textured, and it's just like the worn and faded wood, a paint on the wooden constructions. So I think there's lots and lots of correlations. And then there's some of the diamond ones are rather amazing, where she's opened up the envelope and it's on its corners, and that makes the whole thing really dynamic. Have you got it? Oh, here, well, that's, yes, that one.
Yeah.
This is one of the earlier ones, I think. And again, wonderfully unconventional, because instead of choosing to draw, a pretty bunch of flowers, this one is definitely past its sell-by date. She did quite a few paintings of dead flowers in jam jars. And there's a wonderful poignancy
of dead flowers.
Yeah, wonderful poignancy about the fragility of the flower. So it once it's cut, it'll only bloom for so long, and the way it drops. I think, but this one, interestingly, is on a window envelope, which I personally am very fond of. I'm going to show you one that I prepared earlier, and I think as a device, it provides a wonderful opportunity to incorporate, this broken surface. Yeah, let's have a look at one of those that are triangular.
Actually, yeah. She's made the envelope into a vase, yeah.
Yeah. And this one being, diamond shaped, it sort of echoes the drop of the fuchsia flower. But again, in a jam jar. I like that. And that, these flowers are not sort of arranged. They're wonderful. They're picked from her garden, presumably, and just plonked in a jam jar. I don't know at what point the way they're framed is quite interesting, because there's not, some of them are mounted, but most of them seem to be displayed in quite a contemporary way, where, you know, the window mount, as it were, is left, and so the mount is very much part of the work. Is there another one of the anemones one was very good?
I think the only close-ups I took were that one.
That one. Oh, that one. Well, I like that one because of the sort of scratchy marks she's made in the background area. And again, the texture so echoes the texture of the weathered paintwork on her wooden constructions. And, you know, the incorporating the torn edges, she's never attempted to neaten up the edges, because that's all part of the presentation, if you like. And I mean, envelopes are just wonderful. Well, now, of course, envelopes are decidedly rare, really. I mean, you only get the bills and stuff, and maybe a personal letter, but, you know, whereas one used to be inundated with mail, one rarely gets it these days. So there's something sort of rather, it's resonating of a past era. But yeah, interesting that she always uses the inside and not the outside. She doesn't incorporate the postmark, or, you know, that, and because that's quite consistent with her work. She's obviously, she could have if she'd wanted to, but she's decided that it's the inside of the envelope that interests her, because they invariably, envelopes have this lining. Even the most you know, even, you know, whether it's an envelope from the water seaboard or gas bill or whatever. I mean, I'm showing you this one again because this is Brighton and Hove City Council. You know, wonderful pattern on there, and you find invariably the most modest envelope has a lining, which is quite intriguing. Let's have a look at one more. Tell me to stop when you're wanting to move on.
A couple more minutes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just think, because about, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it, Rachel, when we had an exhibition, or maybe it was only 2 years ago, we, the collective that I'm part of, Edgeland Modern, we'd had a little exhibition of like 6 or 7 of us responding to the envelope, and we all contributed because we all love the envelope so much. With it, they remind me particularly of sort of men's shirts, you know, in their often blue or grey patterns. And you know, just the construction and the edges are fascinating, and give you wonderful opportunities for incorporating a window in something. So yes, I think it would make a great exhibition, actually, of if lots of Blue Monkey members proffered their efforts from the back of an envelope. I think it would be quite fun.
Thank you. That's a great idea, actually. I've got a whole drawer of envelopes that I've kept.
Yeah, I
can do something with
throw them away now. Yeah,
and I think there's something quite nice also with the you know, with the dots and the sort of the printing process that links back to the Melissa Gordon works as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in 1975, yes, I'm sure she was the first. But marvelous that she was being so creative right to the end, wasn't she? I think that the last one she did in this little show, and she probably did more, but the last one was 1999.
Okay.
So she must have been in her 80s.
Not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, thank you, Pat. I think we're going to move on now to Judy, if that's okay. Judy, if you put your mic on and kick off. And I think I was saying to the other speakers, I've tried to incorporate everyone's selected works, and these really nice ones are the professional shots, and then the dodgy ones are mine that I took this morning. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, if that's okay.
Can I just check, Steph, is this the closest we get, or is there a close-up of this one?
So that's the first
Oh
piece.
yeah, great. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
And then you've got that piece and that one for that work, and then I've got close-ups of the other one. So I just thought it'd be good to see them in situ as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Actually, that's an interesting thing. The one on the left, which I'm not talking about actually, but that there is a kind of elusive shape in it. You know, you look at that and you think, oh, it's a ping pong bat or whatever it might be. But mostly the pieces are very simple, which is the thing that struck me, because I have no particular facility for found object sculpture at all. I never find anything that I think I'd like to use, and I'm not sure I would have a clue what to do with it if I did. I have got a piece of Brighton West Pier that I picked up on the beach the day it was all destroyed, which is just a boring little bit of wood, actually. So I mean, I was intrigued by this because I didn't know if I would like it, and I'm ashamed to say I couldn't remember ever having heard of her, which may be because she seems to have been somehow overshadowed by her contemporaries who are better known. So I was very interested in ideas about process. I mean, I wouldn't have liked these, I think, if it were not for the colour, because colour's my thing. So there are a couple of plain wood examples in the exhibition, which I didn't really like. And early on, there was, I think she did some that were just bits of wood. And then presumably, as she gradually built up her wood pile, she found all these different bits of colour, and in some cases, not pattern exactly, but texture going on, so that the surface would be interrupted. I mean, they're by no means all plain colours, in fact, practically never. So I was thinking about how these work, and it can be quite difficult sometimes to find information about how somebody was working. You tend to get sort of people writing about them and saying, oh, they did this and that, but you think, yeah, but how did they do this and that? And it's not always very revealing what gets said. But there is a video of Margaret Mellis talking about doing these, and it's interesting to find, because I hadn't particularly picked up on this, but it's concurrent with the envelope drawings, that she started these at the end of the late 70s, and carried on then to the end of her practice, which was a bit short of the end of her life, but she died at 95, so she didn't do too bad. On this one, the other thing that kind of interested me about all of them actually was that they have titles, And the first ones, apparently, I think there's about 50 where she just numbered them and then started giving them titles gradually. So although they're quite abstract, they do have quite evocative names. And this one's called Heap, which is nice because it could be just a heap. But then you look at it more closely, you start to see a real organizational dynamic going on. And for me, I mean, there's lots of movement. It's almost at first glance random, and then you start seeing that it's not, and it's all kind of containing, although there's a lot of dynamism to it, it's all kind of containing itself within this almost square contour. And I have an embarrassing confession to make, because I saw the exhibition without thinking that I was going to talk about it, because I wasn't at that point. So then I chose this one off the postcards. And after I was randomly Googling something, I discovered that I've been looking at it the wrong way up. And I couldn't think why that was, but it's actually because I had it sitting on the wood sort of, what's the word for it? The segment on the side, the curve. So I'd moved it 90 degrees. And for some reason that worked. It worked for me. And I think it's because then it was echoing what would be happening with brush strokes. So pulling from the left to the right, I'm right-handed, and pulling from up to down rather than going up the surface. So to me, it was more like looking at it as if it was painting. And I'm quite curious because I think she was painting with these things. And there's lots of ways in which I think that's reflected in various structures and the color choices and the texture choices and so on. And actually, interestingly, I mean, obviously it works this way up. This is the way up it's supposed to be. But it works to me, it works my way up as well. It doesn't work the other two possible ways up. So if you go, get yourself a postcard and just sort of twizzle it around so that you can see which bits seem to work and which don't. The colours, looking overall, I mean, there's a fairly traditional, I would say, approach to colour theory underlying it. So I don't know how deliberate that was, but this is very kind of typical of crossing the spectrum from warm to cool. So you've got the yellows and reds against green and blue. You've got a solid neutral in the grey and a textured neutral in the plain wood. And I think that looking at it in terms of both the overall organisation and the depth of the piece, it's the colour that makes sense of that structure. It could look very much more random than that. And it's sort of, the colour is sort of ordering the relationships, both across what would be the picture plane on a painting, but also in the depth. So if you look, the darker colours are behind, the blues are behind the cooler colours. And nothing is overwhelming. I mean, the pale blue and the yellow are quite bright, but they don't overwhelm the other colours. They're all playing a part. Oh, where shall I go now? Yeah, I will. You can just move around and then we'll come back to the green one later. Okay. Steph, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was just...
on the two pieces you mentioned, Heap and the green one, so...
Sorry?
I don't have that many images, I'm afraid. I think I've just got the sort of in-store shots. And
no, it's fun, because I just want to talk about process a bit.
Sure.
Because that made me wonder, and There is a video, by the way. This is where I'm getting a lot of this information from, because if you read online or in catalogues, people tend to be regurgitating the same sort of phrases, but the video is all kind of horse's mouth stuff, so that's useful. And she talks about initially when a friend brought to her studio the skeleton of a boat. So I don't know how much of it. I mean, I would imagine a cross section rather than the whole thing. And what she says about that, when she started to think, well, she didn't sort of start to think about working with it really. It happened, it kind of evolved. And she says, almost independently, bits of wood came out of my wood pile and lay down on the broken bones of the boat.
Oh.
But when you think about it, she's got a wood pile. So she was halfway there, otherwise they wouldn't have been available. So it was not something that kind of came out of the sky in a fit of, I don't know what, divine inspiration or something. It was being conscious of possibilities, I think, and being interested in everything that she might be able to use, probably much in the same way as the envelopes. And then later on she says, I take bits out that I like and go on picking out bits that I like, and then I put them together. I'm not trying to depict anything at all. And she goes on to say, when I'm in a bad place, I don't pull out anything that works. So I think we've all had that experience, haven't we? When you're having a bad day and you just can't make it happen. There's a piece called Bogman, which is also in the exhibition, which you look at if you go, because she does talk interestingly about that in the video. It's not very long, it's only about an hour, about how that one evolved. And she remarks on that one, I didn't paint any of it because I was curious to know whether she only worked with pieces that she'd found, or whether she was intervening in the colour or even the shape. She talks about a bit about it. There's one which is not in this exhibition. I think she talks about finding a piece that was the right colour, but it wasn't the right shape. So she actually made a piece. And in an earlier work, there's a kind of paddle shape that she uses as a sort of angel. And then she copied that and made several different versions of the assemblages. But she says, go back to my point about painting, she says the focus of the work was shape, colour, texture and depth. There's my little obsession coming in there. And she's not interested in telling a story or illustrating something. She is working purely with the materials, which is kind of right for the time. I think it's a kind of truth to materials approach. She said that at an earlier stage of her career, she tried sculpting in stone, but she didn't want to go on working in a medium in which colour was unimportant. So I can imagine stone carvers having a bit to say about that comment, but I see what she means. It's much more monochromatic. If we go on to the green heart, which I've got a lot less to say about. Well, one thing, is anybody seeing a heart here? Because I'm really not.
No.
So I did actually try on the postcard tracing the contour shape to see if it was anything like a heart, and it really wasn't. And I suspect the thing about this one is really just the colour, because it's so much simpler than Heap. And it's got this lovely range of the greens. And then the pop of complementary red. So again, it's quite classic colour theory, that. And I think green is, I think it's sometimes a a colour that abstract artists don't get around to using as much. My postgraduate tutor was Terry Frost, who incidentally knew Margaret Mellis. And I can remember him saying, oh, I don't touch the greens, they're really hard. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah.
It is, I like that shift, you know, you've got the dark and the pale, you've got the blue to the yellowish green. So it's kind of obvious how those would fly together. And the fact that they're also strictly vertical, which I think I initially took as a kind of simplistic approach. But then I felt after I'd seen it and gone away, and then was trying to decide which bits to focus on for this meeting, it sort of haunted me. I just remembered it very clearly, and it somehow intrigued me that it was simple and not simple at the same time. And has everyone seen the chat comments? There's various ideas coming in from people about what kind of heart it might be. I did think it does, it does have that kind of coming out of it structure that an actual heart does have, but it's also possible that there was something in her mind that was nothing to do with any of that. So the titles are imponderable. You tend to, I think, park a title on something after you've done it. I certainly do. Sometimes it's kind of perfect if you can find the right words, and other times you think, oh, now I've got to exhibit this, I'd better call it something. So we just don't know with these which was happening, but this one I think I imagined it to be more simplistic than it is and went back to it and was rewarded. There's another one in the show that's very green and vertical, and I was tempted to do that one as well, but I'll leave that for somebody else. So anyway, I'm actually running out of stuff now. I've got loads of notes and I can't.
Well,
I think I've made the points I meant to make. And
thank you.
I do think, personally, I think she was painting with stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Not a brush, absolutely. And also wonder if I did get sidetracked onto the work of her second husband. So not to minimize her at all, because he wasn't particularly well known or fated in the way that her earlier contemporaries had been. But his collages, the paper collages, torn paper, are absolutely fantastic. So go and have a look at him as well. His name was Francis Davison. He died before her. So there's a lot out there. It's not necessarily explanatory, but there's a lot of visuals that are helpful.
Great, thank you.
The end.
That was brilliant, and yeah, lots of interesting thoughts and ideas on the chat. I'm just aware of the time, so we're going to move on to Roger, if that's okay, who's going to range both exhibitions. So I've done what I did with the previous speakers and just sort of taken some close-ups of the works that you'll be talking about. So you just tell me where you want me to go and when you want me to move slides. Okay.
Thank you. Right. Well, when I was invited to participate for this evening, I hadn't actually been to the show, so I didn't know the show, and I hadn't heard of Gordon and Melis, and I thought that had I heard of the words Gordon and Melis out of context, I could have thought that they were an estate agent or a high-end chocolate. But I did visit, and I became really engaged and enjoyed both shows. And I was struck by the fact that there were two separate exhibitions, but both very much in harmony. And they worked really well, despite the artworks being so wildly different. And I know that the curator had created a connection, and as I understood it, and as I read it, I'm going to read it, it was, my interpretation was, two female artists that in their own ways reference and illustrate an art world that is still in part male dominated. And I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, actually, surely any two of many female artists could do the same thing. But the exhibitions worked so well, and there were obviously the two artists were picked, but they could have been picked regardless of their feminist aspect. So I thought, well, why do the exhibitions with such contrast work together? And I started to try to put my mind to a start point of knowing nothing. So I had nothing to read, I had no one to help explain. I can't ask a painting for any sort of explanation. It's silent. I can't come to a conclusion based on gender, because a painting or artwork hasn't got any sex. But if you look at a painting, and as we all know, a painting has emotion, and it can return emotion. It could be pleasure, confusion, distress, love, puzzlement, and a painting can provoke thought as well. And so I went back to the question of why do I think the two exhibitions were so in harmony, and why did I feel there was such an affinity between Melis and Gordon, an affinity which came just by standing in front of their respective works. So firstly, I liked how the artist let me into what I think were their influences, with their influences in trying to develop their work and produce new things. And with Melis, with early Melis, I went back to look at the one we see on the screen, and I saw within it an influence of Matisse's portrait of Madame Matisse. And then with the white wine bottle and candlestick, I saw Braque, and with what I really love, the superb, it's called Girl and Flowers, that's it, orange and purple, I saw William Scott. And I see all these things building up through the rest of the show, which we've seen pictures of, working up to her final constructions. But with Gordon, it was completely different and more complicated. Gordon, to me, doesn't really show her art influences directly, but references them like Pollock. But the touchstone with history is that it really comes with her use of great, as we see here, greatly enlarged print screens used as a graphic image or matrix. And print screens which are used just as much today as they were 100 years or so ago. And I saw somewhere that it could echo pointillism, but somehow doubt whether Gordon really had that in mind when she produced this sort of work. So, secondly, I thought that specific works spoke to me on a very personal level, and produced similar feelings, although for different reasons, and both bringing me back to points in my past. Because much of my childhood was spent in a fishing town, and I was playing on a beach. I would play on a beach amongst the clinker-built trawlers. And I can't help but think that every piece in a Melis driftwood construction, be it part of a boat or something which is being washed over the side, has a story to tell. And the story is historic, but it's also brought together in a new form. And I find this piece, the one we've just seen, the one on the screen now, it was very evocative. The ribs actually remind me of a spine. They don't remind me of ribs, but whatever, ribs or spine. I look at that and I think that boat is now lost to the world, but it's been recreated in a new life as the piece we see there, which I think is rather marvelous. And part of my career was in advertising, and I was immersed in all kinds of print. And Gordon's wide appropriation of the print process, images, gives me cause for happy reflection back to what I used to do. She obviously has a good knowledge of print and likes to use it. And with the two of them, it's the emotional, visceral thing that these artists give me. And as I was making my notes and as I'm talking now, I can remember the smell of the sea, and I can remember the smell of print and printer's ink and the lovely smell of paper. Then another reason when I was putting all this together is that both Melis and Gordon combine figuration and abstraction in a way that demands a long look to digest and enjoy. And they both use disruption and interruption as visual devices. Melis uses, as we've seen, the careful juxtaposition of wood and colour, and Gordon has her layering to interrupt and create confusion. And then my final sort of set of thinking was that I wanted to compare the contrast between Melis and Gordon. And for example, if you take Melis, they tend to be small and intimate pieces. Gordon's big, you know, the big structures, big canvases. Melis refuses to introduce modern drifty stuff into her work. Plastic bags, which she could have found, as well as timber, plastic bottles, polystyrene cups, all the stuff one finds. Gordon incorporates images from anywhere, it seems, new or old. And Melis's construction materials have an aura almost of handcrafting and imperfection, whereas Gordon's got gesture, as you can see, but also accuracy, contemporary industrial process, the matrix, and she's got a strong logic about what she does. So, summing up, I have read the curator's introduction to the two exhibitions, and I do see that the exhibitions unveil two important female artists. And I see that the exhibition reference an art world still in part male dominated. I can understand all that. But really, why in my mind do the shows fit so well together? And the answer I've given myself is that it's less about female artists and it's all about contrast or contrasting harmony. And that's it. Something to please discuss.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. That was great, and lovely to hear about how the works brought back memories from your life, I guess. think that what we'll do for time is we'll move on to the next speaker, and I suppose if people have questions and things, we can put them in the chat if they want. And I noticed that June has joined us. Hi, June.
Hi.
So if we move on to Steph first, I thought I'd put you at the end, June, because I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I've just managed to get a cup of tea. So
good for you. Good for you. Take a breather. So Steph, if we can move on to you first, if that's okay. And I have incorporated your PowerPoint with these images too. So again,
Okay.
tell me what you want to do and when.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
When I talk about the three different artists, at the end of the description of each of the three, if you could put the picture of the person up first and then the image, that'd be great. So can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah.
I'll be talking about Melissa Gordon's work with reference to this image, Female Ready-Made Elsa 1917 to 2017, and the rubbing of the studio facade, which is behind it. I'm going to deal with two topics. The first is documenting female abstraction, and the second is theatricality. So to the first topic then, female abstraction. Melissa Gordon's kind of found a way of correcting an historical injustice by revising the histories of female artists previously overlooked. She's documenting female abstraction that was ahead of its time, I think, and her work leaves us with a set of clues and a kind of mystery to solve. Gordon talks about murder notice boards like those you see on television, TV detective stories. And I get a kind of pleasure in deciphering the puzzle that she set us up on these visual storyboards. She says that much of the female work of the past was described as fakery, and she includes fakes of her daughter's paintings in her work. She questions the real, I think, and the unreal surfaces, using images of grids and walls and holes and metal sheets and holes in metal sheets. So we see real as well as fake surfaces, a kind of ambiguity. We can sort of see through and beyond some of her works, and we don't know if they're real or painted. In this exhibition, she's researched very detailed, in a detailed way, three overlooked female painters, and their work, I think, is central to the puzzle. And I'm ashamed to say I hadn't heard of two of them prior to this exhibition. The three painters are Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhofen, Janet Sobel, and Marlowe Moss. And each of these three women have very distinctive practices. Dadaist Elsa von Freytag may have been the originator of the ready-made. Janet Sobel worked with gestural marks and drip painting, which inspired Pollock. And Marlowe Moss, a constructivist, used geometrical grids and was a respected contemporary of Mondrian. Melissa Gordon's kind of echoed their practices when she's created her works. We've got Marlowe Moss's grids, we've got the Baroness's ready-mades, and we've got Sobel's gestural marks. And I'll talk about each of these three artists separate now to Gordon. Elsa von Freytag-Loringhofen was a German-born sculptor, poet, and artist who studied art in Germany and later worked in Berlin as a burlesque artist. She moved via Sicily to New York in 1909, and she was an intellectual who demanded sexual autonomy. She used her body both as an art form and as she was also an artist model. She, at the height of her renowned fame, she was a familiar figure in Greenwich Village in New York. She was the kind of mother of American Dada. She wore a coal scuttle hat, a bra made out of tin cans, and matchbox earrings. Her first ready-made, which you just saw, which was a heavily rusted metal ring, that's called Enduring Ornament. It was made in 1913 and named as a work of art 1 year before Duchamp created his first ready-made bottle rack, which was 1914. It was Duchamp who coined the term ready-made, which he applied to the famous fountain or urinal. And prints and photographs of this urinal appear in Gordon's work. And it could well be argued that actually it was Elsa von Freytag that gave Duchamp the urinal initially. And there's quite a lot of work trying to prove that. The Baroness, for example, wrote to her friend and she said, "Sarah, if you find a tin can on the street, stand by it until a truck runs over it and then bring it to me." She admired Duchamp artistically and perhaps romantically, and one of her early performances as a performance artist consisted of rubbing a newspaper article about nude descending a staircase over her naked body while reciting a poem that ended, "Marcel, Marcel, I love you like hell, Marcel." So while Duchamp, perhaps not surprisingly, didn't return her romantic advances, he did admire her as an artist, and he said about her, "She's not a futurist, she is the future." Sadly, she wasn't. In her own lifetime, she fell from favour and ended destitute and sometimes homeless. So now I'm going to move on to Janet Sobel, who was almost the opposite character to the Baroness. She was described by a critic as a Brooklyn housewife who really does have a flair for pattern and colour, a primitive, unschooled artist. Now, how condescending can you get? On the other hand, Elaine de Kooning said of Sobel's work, "This is a picture of paint, a relic of what is a painting. It's painting as a verb. It's a relic of passion." The art collector Peggy Guggenheim included Sobel's work in a 1945 group show called The Women at her Manhattan gallery. And then a year later, she gave Sobel a solo show, and Guggenheim referred to Sobel as the best woman painter. These two shows brought Sobel a good deal of attention, and the art critic Clement Greenberg, as well as Pollock, viewed her work. Greenberg wrote in his essay, American Type Painting, "Pollock and myself admired these pictures rather furtively," adding, "Later on, Pollock admitted these pictures made an impression on him." And this quote actually appears in one of Melis and Gordon's paintings, written on a letter. You can actually see a photograph or a print of the letter. Sobel's most distinguished painting, which is this one, is called A Milky Way. It was 1945, and it's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it was made a year before Jackson Pollock's first strip painting, Freeform, which is also in Museum of Modern Art. There's a really good article, if anyone wants to read it, I can give you the link. It's in the Woman's Art Journal by Gail Levin, and she talks about this work. When Sobel moved away from New York, because she was, after all, only a housewife, she followed her husband to his new posting. She was sidelined and forgotten. She also became allergic to something in the paint, so she had to start working in crayon. And the art critic Sandra Zalman said, "Sobel did not fit into the categories that the art world conceived of her. She got attention for being an outsider, and then is quickly forgotten for being an outsider." So there she is in her studio, which was her home in Brooklyn. The next one of the artists that Gordon refers to in detail is Molle Moss. The Tate website describes Moss's work as European and belonging to the international tradition of constructivism, but she is a British artist who made some of her most significant works in the UK. A British appraisal of her work and a celebration of her achievement is overdue. She trained in Paris and worked under Leger and was an associate of Mondrian. She spent a good deal of her life in the Netherlands, and much of her early output pre-1939 was destroyed during the war. On her return to Cornwall in 1941, she was somewhat excluded from the artistic community down there, perhaps because of her lesbianism and cross-dressing. Only Naum Gabbo, who'd known her in Europe, remained a faithful friend to her. A factor in Moss's lack of recognition now, according to an article, Marlowe Moss, Space, Movement and Light by Lucy Howarth, is because of that destruction of her early work. She appears to be an artist of the 50s rather than the 30s, and as a fully fledged constructivist, but without the journey to abstraction to kind of legitimise her. So without any evidence, the art world has been very slow to accept Marlowe Moss as an artist of comparable standing to people like Mondrian. Now, I'm really grateful to Melissa Gordon for bringing these three fascinating artists to my attention, because I certainly wouldn't have known about them prior to this exhibition. And I really enjoyed the kind of puzzle of the exhibition of finding out why on earth she'd stuck these little pictures of the urinal and these little bits of letters from Greenberg on the works. But I want to talk a bit about the theatricality, which is quite interesting, I think. Melissa Gordon talks about painting as a locale, as a place that is performative, where actions are rehearsed, collected and investigated, that also plays with gesture as something real and projective. Her structures are an attempt at a kind of theatre in the round, a set in which to document female abstraction. Looking through and behind the steel structures into what she calls a performative space. I'm going to quote her. She said, "In the process of making work, I often ask myself, what is being staged? For me, this includes such things as action, gesture, subtext, and potential." Gordon uses really theatrical terminology. She wants her work viewed in the round, she says, not in proscenium. And in the past, she has worked on staging of futurist plays by Mina Loy. Now, I'm puzzled about this frame structure. Are they theatrical sets with the canvas missing here and there? How do they relate to the studios of the artist? Are they cages? And I'd be grateful really for other people's ideas here, because I'm a little bit lost on that one. And I'm going to be a bit pedantic now, because I don't think this work is in the round, as Gordon suggests it is. I think it's more like theatre promenade, where the viewer wanders in the spaces and encounters moments of action in different spaces. These large gestural works, the rubbings on the wall that you saw earlier, and this one here, which is a frottage of a studio wall, are surely backdrops to the work, that the painted and printed works. And sorry, I've lost my place. Yeah, and these are backdrops to the wall rather than they're rather like scenery right at the back of the stage. So they push the artwork forward, so it's much more like looking at a proscenium arch. So I would argue that it is this promenade feeling that you get with her work. But finally, what I want to talk about is what I got out of it personally, and that is that I enjoyed solving the puzzle that she set up. But however pertinent and important the work is, I was left feeling that it only appeals to my brain, and that the questions she set up, yes, they do need answering about feminist abstraction, but it is the work, it doesn't appeal to my heart. So I wonder if I'm indoctrinated by that male-orientated art history. Am I like that critic of Sobel's? Am I longing for a flair for pattern and colour? Interestingly, Marlowe Moss wrote about her work that it's of her rational mind, but she also talks about a kind of aesthetic emotion. And what I'm missing here is a kind of aesthetic emotion to Melissa. Do you get an aesthetic emotion from it? I think the frottage wallpaper behind this painting is the one that appeals most to my heart. I think it does have an action and a subtext to it, a kind of urgency. But the presentation of the wallpaper puzzled me. It doesn't feel committed. It's a printed wallpaper, and it's not like the canvases that are hung opposite, the big swirly canvases with the big brush marks on it, which surely do have a theatricality and a scale to them. And I wonder about this wallpaper. Why isn't it glued to the wall? Would that have made them too solid? Was it a deliberate or pragmatic decision to not actually paper the wall with something she's called wallpaper? So I was a bit confused about that. So I'm left in the puzzle, not so much about the subjects, which seem to me to be those three fantastic female painters from history, but I'm more confused and puzzled about the form of the work. So I'll be grateful for your opinions of that.
Thank you, Steph. That was brilliant. And thanks also for bringing those artists to my attention as well. If you've got your links and things, bung them on the chat. That'd be great. I'm sure people would be happy to kind of get references. I know I would. I think because we are running over, we're going to move on to June, if that's okay. Our final speaker, June Nelson, who will also be talking about a piece of Melis and Gordon's work. So like the other speakers, June, if you can let me know, moving back and forward across the slides, I can certainly do that for you, but I'll kick off with this image here. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me then?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, yeah, sorry I was late, folks, and it's been a bit hectic at the end of the day and I had to go somewhere else, so I've completely mislaid my notes, so I'm just going to extemporize. Steph, that was a great summary of the work, so I'm glad I don't have to go through all that. I'm going to just respond fairly personally to this space. Incidentally, I do agree with what you say at the end of your presentation. I think it's a very interesting installation. I think it's a very well curated show, but in the end, I did feel that Melissa Gordon didn't have her own voice really in this, and that although I did know the artist that she refers to a lot anyway, but I feel that her use of feminist art history is a little bit superficial. I mean, if you go back to writings in the 80s forward, there's a lot being said about the female voice in art history and the silencing of the female voice. So I did feel very excited about this exhibition, and obviously invigilating at Towner, I've been there quite a lot, and I've got to the stage where I'm not getting much more from it. I'm finding it intellectually interesting, but literally quite superficial. So I chose this piece, though, but you can ask me about that if you like. So please feel free to interrupt, because yes, I'm feeling slightly frazzled at the end of the day. So I chose this piece mainly because I'm interested in the subject matter, and it's something that influences my work, in that I'm quite interested in the idea of female agency and mythology. So I was quite intrigued to see this piece. But to my mind, she chooses Anne Carson's piece there at the bottom. I don't know if you've, I've got it on my phone so I can read it out of it. If you can't zoom in on it, bear with me. As I said, I've lost all my notes, so I will go ahead. All right. Yeah, so basically she has sort of rewritten a piece from Anne Carson from the 1995, I think it is, which I was quite surprised at, because there's been so much written about Greek mythology, particularly in the past 10 years, and new translations of the Odyssey, novels written, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, that I was slightly underwhelmed by her approach to this. So she talks about sounds in the context of madness and witchery, as well as bestiality, which are conditions commonly associated with the use of the female voice in public. So she's going to the, so it's quite obvious. I think we all know about that. But I was surprised that she literally incorporates things into her work. I mean, she's down at the bottom there, you can just see that that mouth there, which is a reference to Samuel Beckett's play Not I. Was famously Billy Whitelaw did that mouth of a slightly hysterical female going through her life, and she's completely in the dark and all you see is the mouth. So I feel she's appropriating lots of bits, putting them together as preparation for further work. And so I feel I would like to see more from this work. Although I enjoyed the space, I think it's intellectually quite interesting, but it is quite literally superficial. So I don't understand where Melis and Gordon is in this. I think there are quite a lot of modernist art history tropes that are used in the work. The grid, the dots, you know, and those paintings that look a bit like a Lichtenstein or a Sigmar Polka. Lots of major male artists, obviously. But I think it doesn't go much further. I think if you have a superficial knowledge of modernist art history, you'll think, oh yes, that's quite interesting. Then you start thinking, well, why is she referring to female ready-mades when she's just printing feminine objects on the canvas? You know, they're not ready-mades, they're referring to them. So I find it quite cool, but interesting. And I think Steph's presentation was great, so I'm not going to sort of repeat anything there. But I'm just wondering, those of you who've been there, whether you feel that way about it or not. I mean, superficiality isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it is literally very superficial in its effect as well. I don't know where that's come from, not from me. But I think, you know, I do like intellectual artwork, so that's not something that that would bother me, but I feel there needs to be a bit more of Melis and Gordon in this. And I think Steph was right. If you are promenading through a sort of a brief history of modernism and its approach to women artists, but I feel it's something we know. And so what now? That sounds a bit negative. But that's only because I've spent a lot of time with the exhibition and I was hoping to get more and more from it, but I don't think I do. But I do admire the installation. I think, Steph, you were talking about the structures and what they meant. Apparently, one of them is sort of Elsa What's-Its apartment, and the other one is Sobel's studio. And then that's obviously echoed by the frottage, which is the rubbing from Gordon's own studio. But also, there was a very practical reason for placing them where they are in that town who didn't have to block up the gap between the two spaces, and so it made a very interesting way of guiding the visitors through the space and using that hole that was there. So anyway, I'm just so sorry, I'm reading the points here.
I didn't.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, I'd rather have a discussion about it now, because I think Steph's presentation was so good and we saw so many pieces in there that I'd just be interested to see what other people thought of it, because I felt she's telling us what her influences are, but then not doing much more with it other than create a really interesting space, which is fine, but I've sort of got slightly underwhelmed by it now. Sounds a bit harsher than I mean it to. It's probably because I'm tired after a day at work and standing in it all day.
I don't feel personally that they hang together visually at all. I don't know.
No, I don't think they were meant to either.
Paintings? Why are they not a dissertation or something?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I watched a while ago. I happened to come across a video, and she's doing a PhD in gesture, and she was introducing, I think at Kingston University, a conference or something. I just listened to her bit, and really, yeah, that is it's a visual representation of what she's writing about.
Right.
And I'm not sure the visual representation works. So she talks about gesture and liquid gesture and so on. But I think her work, because she's a printmaker, really, in effect, it's very dry, which sort of is paradoxical, considering she's using the term liquid gesture. And there are a lot of painters like Cecily Brown, who doesn't particularly appeal to me, but she uses gesture and paint like de Kooning would, but then sort of takes it on from a female perspective. So she's not forcing her view of gesture and paint onto you. She's embodying it in the work, but I don't think this work embodies anything as such. It intellectualizes it, but not in a particularly profound way.
I'm kind of interested in all the barriers, being a devotee of American cop shows.
Yeah.
I see a chain link fence, you know, a steel frame.
Yeah, it's like
I'm seeing a baseball court somewhere, a basketball court somewhere.
Yeah, but it is interesting, that idea that she referred to some of her work as like, you know, those criminal evidence boards where you stick things up. And you could say that it's giving you clues to art history, but it's not history we know. And we know the perpetrators, so it's not that interesting, you know. It's sort of, it's a bit more like a mood board, or a bit like a student. When you ask students, how did you get to this? Show me your research. But she's done it in a very, very professional and grand way. And I like the fact that she's ambitious and bold enough to do it on a big scale, you know, and that she's successful in that sense. But I thought Steph's presentation had more passion about the three artists than this piece does. So I was a little, and going back to the piece that I chose because I'm interested in the Greek mythology, I was disappointed that she merely referred to reauthoring something by just simply reproducing in her own hand these sort of the Greek vase images and so on, without taking them any further, you know. So that's it. So I don't know if anybody else thinks that.
Does anyone have any contrasting or agreeing points, perspectives? Sharon, yeah. Oh, you need to put your mic on if that's okay.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it to begin with, and in the comment, you know, I like the layering and the kind of different surfaces. But I think the point you were making, June, about this, and I think somebody else made the point about it being quite superficial. And I don't know how old Melissa is, but I think, you know, lots of us of a certain generation, but I think if you've been brought up with lots of kind of images on the internet and that access to information in very quick ways, it felt a little bit like, oh, I can Google this and drag this, and I can Google that and drag this. And it felt a little bit like some quite complex ideas, but just presented. I think mood board is quite a good way of putting it, and it's kind of quite superficial way. And I think the other thing I found disappointing is like the quality of the paint work. I mean, I like the kind of screen print elements and the gestural parts, but like the thinness of the paint, I mean, that's just a personal thing, the thinness of the paint kind of lacked, it drained away the energy in a way, because the energy in those big gestural things where the paint's nice and thick and coloured, the colour's very solid, it has a power, whereas on the canvas, which is very white, it just seemed like, oh, add a bit more pigment to that, you know.
Yeah, she was using this flash, which is like an acrylic, but it's based, instead of the usual polymer, I think it's vinyl that's suspended the pigment, and it does look like that. It is all very, sort of, a bit advertising-y sort of, but it's interesting. Emily, the curator, has recently joined while this was almost being ready to hang and being installed, gave a little talk in the space today, which was handy. But she's, and I made these points because I was in the space as well, and she said, well, I find it intriguing because if you don't know much, you can go away and Google something. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing. It is a generational thing. And Melis and Gordon is about 40.
Is she? Okay.
He's got twin girls, I think, whose works appear on, they're stuck on. I mean, she doesn't actually develop them, they're just stuck on. And I think the girls are sort of, he might be 6 or 7 or something like that now, I think.
Doesn't she copy them? Doesn't she reproduce them
she reproduces everything, I think. And then, which again, I find a little bit disappointed. It was interesting, as Steph said, it is like you've Googled all these sort of, sort of quick guide to art history and brought it together, rather than really, I mean, there's nothing about, there's so many amazing books that have been written since the 80s about art history, and there's no reference to any of those, really, if you're going to do that. It's like when you Google something, it's the recent things that have been looked at that come to the top. You don't bother to go any further. But I mean, that's doing her a disservice, because surely she must know all these things, but maybe that's her way of doing it. She's giving a talk in January at Towner, so
Right.
it could be interesting.
Could I just ask Steph something about her piece? The three artists that she's referencing on that work, where does that go? Or is it just, look, here are these people? Kind of what's the end point of that?
I thought, for me, the only way I interpreted it was I'd never heard of those women before, those three fascinating, slightly bonkers women, and they were really wacky. And I was just, it made me find out about them. And I thought that was what she was trying to do. She was trying to say, hey, these guys have been forgotten, look at them. And it was rewarding to find out how fabulous they were, really.
But they're not that forgotten, actually. That's the thing. No. I mean, Hate the Jerwood, as it was then, had an exhibition of Marlowe Moss. There's just been another book written about her. And if you read about abstract expressionism, there is reference in feminist art history to Sobel and the urinal. So that's why I found it irritating. She was just skating over the surface.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't sound too negative, but it's great to have an unusual exhibition and to have, somebody, a confident youngish, well, young to me now, artist coming in, ambitious and confident enough to do her work. She sounded really confident, in what she's doing when I listened to her on that YouTube thing, and I thought, it's great that you're so confident, but there's not a lot of depth there, and you're doing a whole PhD on this, and I'm thinking, well,
is there do you think there's a problem, June, with the idea of making a PhD at the same time as you're doing an exhibition? There's two different things there. The PhD is an element, it's a research document about something, but an exhibition isn't a research document about anything. An exhibition is surely an outpouring of your work that's you, and I think that's what you were saying, because you're missing that outpouring of
I wouldn't mind. I mean, obviously she's doing a research-based PhD, practice-based PhD combined. I don't know, and this is, if you look at, she's done similar exhibitions to this. A lot of that work is recent, but they're fair, she's got a definite look. It's just that I found it a little bit. It was as if she thought she discovered a lot of amazing new things, but she hasn't. And that's the thing. So I was quite surprised, because she's obviously, I say, very confident. She talks very intellectually. With I've read a few of her things and conversations with other artists and critics. And as I said, she's heading up this conference, which I can't remember what the conference is about, but I mean, there's a lot of similar sort of things. But and I thought that's great, that you're that confident, because ironically, a lot of mediocre male artists are puffed up and been very confident over the years and are part of art history, which is fine. You don't have to be the best female artist to be part of art history. Whereas men, we won't have true equality until we can be as mediocre as the next man. But that's a long way off, isn't it?
Write that down quick, Jim, before you forget. It's brilliant.
So that's the thing. So I don't want to sound that negative, but it's probably because I've been staring at that work for a few weeks now, and I got a bit cross that there wasn't much more to it. And it's so, I don't mind cool abstract art. I don't mind cool minimalism, but then you have to have, it has to be better than that, or there has to be a voice coming through. It's like she's not committing herself to anything.
Yeah, like she didn't.
I think you said that, didn't you?
Yeah, why didn't she take it on?
Yeah, you think, you go around, and it is a bit like a sort of, spot the sort of references.
It's
after that,
I'm just going to take chair's opportunity of the chair to say
yeah,
that
sorry,
you're running over. I'm sorry for those that do have to go. I just think it's a really fascinating discussion. I'm going to keep it going for a bit longer. And just because it's our last meeting of the year, I suppose I was going to reference a few things there, just from what I've gathered from the discussion, I guess, and looking at the comments, the idea of the word superficial keeps on coming up, and that idea of the kind of flat plane and the Google image. And I guess that, I think maybe Roger might have something to say about the point that was made about the comparison to advertising, having worked in that kind of field professionally. And thinking back to kind of like those like pop artists like Lichtenstein and Warhol that kind of came from an advertising background. That's a really interesting point. And then I don't know, this idea, I think Geraldine just said it, does it always have to go so deep? Can you not just enjoy it for what it is? And then lastly, the idea around audience, for you and I and whoever that is, we've had our degrees or we've studied and we read and do this, we might know about some of these obscure figures, but for particularly younger artists, maybe college students that are kind of going in, it might be a really good kind of gateway into exploring lesser known aspects of female art history, and the more people that know about it, the better, the more that those ideas can spread and those references can become sort of more widely known. So I think that I totally get your points, but I think there's kind of I think there's a bit more in there about how the artwork kind of operates in a kind of public sphere. I
see what you mean. I agree with that to a certain extent, and and work can be literally superficial, but it's quite interesting watching people coming into the space, because obviously when you're invigilating, you see, so you get people who obviously look as though they're artists or what have you, and then you get sort of interested members of the public, and then you get those who have no idea what they're coming into. And if you're trying to introduce people who don't know much about contemporary art to it, I think it's quite a difficult exhibition, because I think the blurb on the wall as you go in immediately, uses terms like this such and such informs her practice, these sort of this, that, and the other, refers to the various modernist art history tropes. And there's no context for people who don't know anything about that at all. So I think that it falls a bit between, how I don't see how, I take the point young students could come in with a tutor, and then I think they would get something quite interesting from it, and then possibly go away and look these things up. But I'm not sure they would get it entirely from the work.
I mean, that leads into wider discussions around gallery interpretation, how far you go for your audience, and who is your audience. But one last point I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel about the Margaret Mellis over that period of time that you spent in the spaces? Is that something that you really like? Have you had a similar reaction, or do you
not really? Because I think maybe I was expecting more from the Melis and Gordon, in there. And the Melis, I enjoy. It's enjoyable. So I mean, I don't think you have to. You can respond to exhibitions without saying, it's like Graham Crowley says, you don't have to like the art. And in fact, he has a whole essay on I don't like art, because his students used to say to him, you haven't said whether you like this or not. He said, it doesn't matter. I like pizza, but I'm going to discuss your art in relation to its own parameters, and how well it works within its own parameters. And that's what I'm thinking. They both, I think the Melissa Gordon, I'm not quite sure what her parameters are, whether they work well enough within her parameters. With the Melis, I think it does work well within the parameters and the way she was working.
There's something you said about the Melis's exhibition includes work from the whole span of her life and career.
Exactly.
It's only like the first part you'd like to think. So so
it's a different thing, and also Gordon's got much more. She's got more influences and different types of media and access to different things than Margaret Mellis would have. The fact that she was encouraged to take up these sort of constructions because she had to act as a hostess. to all these artists that visited, and she had domestic duties. I mean, that annoys me every time I'm in that space, you know, so that happened to her. But so that's an interesting.
That was a lot earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, by the time she was doing the constructions, she's just living with her husband in the.
No, but if you read but she was encouraged to do the constructions because they were still hosting people a lot. You know, it's like when Elizabeth Frink, you know, had to make dinner after being in the studio all day, no matter, even when she was visited by all sorts of people later in life, you know, because that was expected. So although she was moved, she was living with her husband. But I think they just had lots of visitors and hosting and so on. So she carried on that way of working, which I thought was really interesting. The way you said they're very painterly, those constructions. You know, the eye of the painter is there. I would have been interested to see how a painting might have developed, because obviously a painting is very much of its time, of where it stopped, you know.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, to my mind, the painting slightly ground to a halt. So
but I think it was an enforced grinding to a halt, so you don't know where it would have gone. So I'm sorry, Pat, I missed your bit about the envelope. So that would have been.
I think that's
right.
Yeah.
No, I thought there was quite a lot of crossover between the envelopes and the paint and the construction. Even though one is so obviously, you know, a feminine, you know, a traditional feminine subject, and figurative, but I actually thought that her use of the format of the envelope was actually echoing a lot, and even her scrubbily, her, you know, the way she used pastel in that rather sort of pressing very hard, and you using the texture of that medium echoed the worn and destroyed surfaces.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think what we might have to do is draw things to a close. If anyone has any other points or questions to ask the speakers, just say them now or put them in the chat.
Yes, I just apologise for sounding so negative.
No, it's
tired at the end of the day. So I attended then to sort of, because Steph's presentation was so good, I was just bringing out the bits that were.
No, it's a really interesting conversation to have, and like that's running a bit longer, but I'm aware that it's 8 o'clock now. So if no one has anything to add or comments, you know, or if they do and they want to write them in the chat, then let people know. I can stay on a bit longer and host for a little while. But yeah, I just thought we should thank the speakers. I'll stop recording, and and also say that it's my last Blue Monkey meeting as organizer. So thanks everyone for coming along and joining us, and look forward to seeing you all in the new year, and have a good Christmas break. So I'll stop the recording now, if I remember how to do it.
I think we'll all say